And we're joined now by Alistair Blythe. He's from the OECD Centre for Effective Learning Environments. And me, Camilla, and Camilla are going to talk to him. Camilla's going to ask the first question.
Yeah. What do you think the ideal learning environment looks like, and how does it support learning?
Well, I think that's a very, very good question. I think the ideal learning environment is one that allows experimentation, exploration and curiosity. I think it has a range of different settings that students and teachers can use to work collaboratively or individually. I think it allows people to engage with the environment itself and to support their learning. The space really needs to, as you say, you use the right word, support teaching and learning, because it does that through perhaps providing furniture that can be easily moved around, and that's one of the critical things I think about a good learning environment, is that you can actually easily and quickly rearrange, create the new setting that the student or that the teacher wants, or you as a student or you as a teacher want.
Do you think that the average school lives up to that? Why and why not?
The average school, no. I mean, looking around, and I've been very fortunate to look around at lots of schools around the world, and we talk a lot in our world, I think, about new forms of teaching and learning and new pedagogies. But when you see what's happened, yes, there's some very good examples around the world, but it is very much unusual. And most schools seem to be the very traditional classroom model, the classrooms lined up on either side of a corridor, with the desks all lined up in a nice neat row. And why is that? It may be partly because in some ways teaching hasn't quite caught up with some of the developments in teaching and learning ideas about how you engage students differently in the learning process. I think sometimes there are possibly real constraints in some school buildings that, for example, furniture can be very heavy to move. So actually, by the time you've actually got in a lot of people to help you move it, the class is over. So there's some sort of physical constraints as well. And sometimes, actually, classrooms and school buildings technically aren't very, very nice places to be. They can be very noisy places. The acoustics, the sound is not very well managed, and in some places they can be unsafe. Children, students can feel just unsafe in them, and that itself is not a healthy environment to be in.
So in your work, I guess you need to also work towards some kind of mindset change as well, because you can't just give people like nicer furniture and expect it's going to transform how things happen in a school, presumably. Or maybe you found that just by changing the environment, it does change how people think about it. I don't know. But don't you need to lead some kind of change of mind along with the change of
You absolutely hit the nail on the head, if I can use that phrase. That's absolutely what we found, that you can't just change the building or change the space and then expect the magic to suddenly happen. It's more about a whole system. Teaching has to change, the attitudes have to change to teaching as well. And so how do you get that mindset change? And I think with some of the projects that I've seen, both projects that are new buildings but also working within existing school buildings, they look at the way you work with the teachers on how they carry out their teaching activity. You talk to students as well about how they learn, and at the same time you adjust the environment. So you design all three together. It's really good design starts with people, and so it's not about spending lots of money. It's more about thinking the whole process, design process through, and including the teaching as well. So you're designing a teaching environment with teachers, and you're designing a learning environment with students, and you're bringing the whole lot together in a sort of physical space, a physical surrounding.
Yeah, that's nice how it's not just about expensive kit, because for people around the world with the financial challenges they face, it's nice to be able to hear that it's not about spending millions of dollars on really expensive, flashy schools as such.
It's not. No. No, I mean, you can get some great examples by doing that, but you can also get some great failures.
Yeah.
That really don't work, and you know, I can think of a school which was designed from scratch, a new school, and it was built with all these wonderful areas and wonderful spaces for you to do your group work, for you to do your project work, for you to do science, all these wonderful things. Great. New teacher, new head teacher, and this is a key, I think, to the school principal is one of the keys here. If it's if there's a school principal who's leading and school leadership is leading the teachers as well, then it can work. A new school principal came in this example, and they started trying to build the walls up against and create in this school that really wasn't designed to facilitate that. So that suggests you need to make sure, I think, that a school building is flexible enough to be able to adapt to new teaching and learning situations. And in this particular example, as I say, the walls, were the problem.
What is the most important or surprising finding you have made in your research?
Well, one of the ones that I always kind of reflect on is the ability of the teachers and the students to rearrange their setting to suit their needs. And I think that goes to the core of it. That actually, if you can really allow them to be the designer on the day-to-day basis, week-to-week basis, or month-to-month basis, depending on how they operate as a school, then you've really unlocked the potential of the environment. And the other important thing, I think, also is that it's not just one space within the school. We get fixated on the classroom, which is fine, but in many schools they could use the corridors outside much more as a sort of learning spaces. Those could be learning spaces. You could do all sorts of things, set up, little learning zones in corridors or in the foyer or in the canteen or even outside. And outside the school is important too, the grounds outside the school. So there sometimes can be an awful lot of space around not being used properly. You could kind of go mess around outside. Great learning opportunity.
How do you make sure that all of the children learns the best in the environment you create as an architect?
This is a kind of a difficult area. I mean, how do you measure learning? And of course, there are lots of attempts at measuring learning, and the OECD has its version of the program on international student assessment. One of the problems is that with the physical environment, there are lots of variables, different things going on that impact on the learning, and it's how you isolate and make sure that it's the learning environment that is directly impacting on the student or indirectly impacting on the student's learning. And it might be indirectly impacting by, for example, enabling the teachers to do certain things in a certain way, be it lay out the space or use the technology or whatever, which has a direct impact on the students. So we're looking at various ways to do that. And one of the things we are looking at is looking at how you evaluate the ability of the teachers and indeed the students to rearrange the space. And then we will look and see whether there's been any impact on learning. Indeed, it may be difficult to say that if there's no impact, that doesn't mean to say it hasn't affected it. And there are some studies that do show some correlations, some relationships between the physical environment and learning outcomes. And a recent one from the UK has shown that actually, an environment that's very complex visually. There's lots of things going on, and you go into schools and you see lots of displays, lots of artifacts, lots of colour. Wonderful it looks, but it's too busy, and it has shown that actually it has a negative impact on student. And these were primary students, but it kind of gave an insight into some areas that could be more usefully explored.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, from having been here at the conference, There's so many different sorts of people from around the world. Have you been inspired by anything you can take back into your own work and practice maybe about environments, or maybe about something that's not just about learning environments, or not simply about learning environments, but something else?
Yes, the list could be endless. I think what I have taken back, or what I will take back again, is a sort of something that helps reinforce some of the ideas we've been thinking about ourselves about. Really, actually, students, we all kind of can be self-directed learners. We can all get learning out of all sorts of things we do. Of course, it's not just the formality of the formal instruction. It's all these other things that go on in school and outside school. And therefore, how do we create and make sure that the settings, the school buildings, indeed, if one's being, thinking on a bigger scale, the outside of the school, kind of support all these different things that you can do, that you can engage students, engage teachers. I mean, it's equally important, and as well as parents and the rest of the community.
Great, thank you. Camilla's got a last question.
Yes. For how long time have you been researching in learning environments?
Well, I guess, how long have I been doing it? More formally, I suppose, over the last 9 years. And I came from some architectural practice a while ago where we were looking at it too, but I think more formally in terms of that, yes, about 9 years. But being
informally, I guess you did it when you were 5, when you were 6, when you were 7.
Well, there you are. You make the connections. I mean, this is another interesting thing I found is, of course, you go back, you sort of think, well, what you're doing now, and you're actually making connections with what you were doing when you were 5, 6, 7. Ooh, yeah. I can relate to a learning environment.
Yeah, and typically you think, whoa, if it had been like that when I was at school. When you see some of the amazing examples, you think, oh, I wish we had that.
Yes. Well, yes, and even just the thinking about, we've seen some examples, good examples of these environments that's quite straightforward in terms of their design, but the settings where you've got kids doing group work and project work and collaboration and reading in a corner, all in the same kind of basic box, the same space. And you think, well, actually, that would have been great when we were kids. I could just imagine what we could do with the project-based learning where you're building some wonderful, artifact that's part of your learning experience rather than having to do it at home when,
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alistair Blythe.